Good morning. Podcast is a bit late today because I tell you the truth, I had a rough night, even though I was in bed at 8 o'clock. I can't remember who it was that said it, that said that some men can hear their inner voice with more clarity than others. And some of those men go crazy and some become legends. And I often said like well, I don't like to call it the enlightenment process, but the enlightenment process, a lot of people, I remember saying to a lad in Plovdiv, a lot of people don't make it through. I made a video about this. I said, they end up going around the street holding the cup and hankering after money, begging for money because they end up like the brain doesn't hold up. And and sometimes, I tell you, it's sort of like everything in life. That's what separates the wheat from the chaff. It either holds up or it doesn't hold up. It snaps, but if it snaps, this you might deem me to be insane, but that is insanity. When for example, Nietzsche was a perfect example of this. When the brain snapped, and of course then the writing narrative about syphilis and everything else, but he didn't. I know for a fact, that it wasn't syphilis, but this was a lot of people who were quite envious of Nietzsche that wrote a narrative in this regard, that it was syphilis, but this was an attempt they were in his sister's ear, they were supposed to be his friends, but they were in his sister's ear to more or less orchestrate his demise before this ever happened. Because he was writing things that they didn't agree with. Some people call it anti-Semitism and that, but it wasn't. He wasn't. He actually wasn't an anti-Semite. But but Nietzsche is very, very important in this, and I look at Nietzsche and I say to myself, and the same with Schopenhauer, and a lot of these philosophers, for example, because it's thinking about thinking, thinking is hard, but thinking about thinking is even harder. It's extremely taxing on the mind, especially when it comes to morality, and defining your morality and challenging your own morality. Let me tell you, when you're challenging your own morality, you really, all you have is reason. As I say, the only thing you can say, you have to say to yourself, I am the devil, because let me tell you, nature attacks you and attacks your mind viciously, and if you don't want to go insane, the only thing you have is to be very, very solid in your reasoning and with your intent for everything you do and everything you say. Otherwise, you're not going to hold up. You'll crumble. And that's why when they say the devil attacks weak flesh, weak flesh doesn't stand much of a chance. That's all I'll say in that regard. Weak flesh doesn't stand much of a chance, but you could say, if you take that aspect of the devil attacks everybody, but you could say so does God. You know what I mean? And this is a binary opposite. As I say, nature is comprised of binary opposites, composed of binary opposites, and this is dialectics. I told you the 3 rules of dialectics yesterday, but they're opposing forces that work against each other and with each other to bring about change. Now, if we were to take a different concept of the same thing, we would go with Dionysus and Apollo. Dionysus and Apollo. So Dionysus would have been the god of partying, wine, women, and song, like wine, women, and dancing. So dancing and partying. This was Dionysus. He just liked a good time, and he was the god of this, the Greek god of this. And then his opposite would have been Apollo, which would have been the scholar and the what a lot of people might aspire to as the higher self, as opposed to the lower animal who likes to drink, parties, sort of like BoJack Horseman. But the lower animal enjoys well, as I say, this is my life too, and but even my soul said this is like your life too. I want you to enjoy it. And I said, well, we won't have any problem. I assure you, there won't be any problem in that regard. I look after that end, but it's finding this balance, because everything is balanced, because like I have a choice in this. Like I could, like, as I say, like, if it takes me, say, for example, in relation to my drinking or anything else, I say there's a reason I'm drinking, and I know why I'm drinking, and it's these altered states, including the smoking, are conducive to a better connectivity, an altered state. It dissolves the default mode network. You get a better connection. But that's if you use it for these purposes. But that's not to say you can't enjoy these states. But then I enjoy it all. For example, like last night was a very difficult night, but that's not to say that I didn't enjoy it. I don't enjoy these nights because I come out with the philosophy. So if we take the concept then of Dionysus and Apollo, which would be sort of two, another binary, but a different concept of the same thing. And then, for example, we go back to Dr. Sugrew's video where I was questioning Dr. Sugrew. I didn't question it. I just said, how conscious how conscious an act is your drinking horn? Because he was sitting there drinking out a drinking horn. Now the drinking horn would be, if we really break down the all the little things in seeking to understand you conceptualize everything, you think about everything. So the fact is, it's a drinking horn. It's a Viking drinking horn. Same with the Viking helmet, but it's a Viking drinking horn. Now the Vikings then would have came and raided the monasteries. That was the first thing. When the Vikings came to Ireland, the first thing they did is raided the monasteries. And the monks who were undoubtedly God's people, like, because they're there writing the scriptures. They wrote the book of Kells, and they're there writing the scriptures, so they would have been Apollo. And then we had the Vikings, the drinking, partying, feasting, the strong, basically, the strong. This is a case, another binary, the weak and the strong. So the Vikings came and basically kicked their ass, and one could drop to their knees and say, "Oh, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me?" But this is nature. This is nature. This is dialectics. And when you understand dialectics, you understand that this is nature. You can put whatever concept you want on it, but this is nature. The two, And then, of course, you had the interpenetration of opposites. So some of the Vikings then became Catholic, became Christian, and then they turned on their own and they started to fight their own. And then we had a whole new dialectic then between the old ways and the new ways, which is another dialectic. We have tradition and culture, and as opposed to change, which is the only constant. So, for example, like we could say God would be, if you do an interpretation of the opposites and actually seek to understand the opposites, God would be more. Yes, if we go with these concepts, we break down. We try to understand the opposites before we can understand the interpenetration of opposites. So God would be very much for tradition and culture, and then the devil, for example, would be. Change is the only constant. In other words, the Indians would have said, "No, you can't take our land. You can't take their land," and basically like it's the likes of Trump, even the oil line through their graveyard, the oil line through their sacred lands, through their sacred grounds, and you would have had Obama come along and say, "Oh yes, we'll sign a thing to say that the oil line can't go through your sacred lands," and Trump comes along. Now it's sort of obvious what side Trump is on, but because Trump just said two fingers to the Paris Accord and all this bullshit, and he ran the oil line through their land. He more or less said, "Fuck you and your tradition and your culture. Change is the only constant." You know what I mean? We're running the oil line through. You can't stand in the way of progress, and this is life. But if you can understand now how you start to interpret the opposites. So even if we come back then to Dr. Sugrew's podcast, We have Dionysius there with the Viking drinking horn, doing the drinking. Very reasonable man. I'd have more of a preference for his way of philosophy and his interpretation of philosophy than I would for any others, because he's quite rational, and he, well, as I said, my last comment on his last podcast was, that's Satan sitting there. When they said, oh, Satan gets all the best lines, I said, that's Satan sitting there with the drinking horn. Now, and then we have when he proposed like that more or less philosophy overtaking the religions, superseding the religions. The other two boys were having none of it. And I said, are the two boys Christian, are they? Are the two boys Christian, I asked. And he said, no, only I am. And I said, oh, right. And then my brain all night was going, slow it down. And this is why yesterday's podcast was about slow it down. So you have to know when to speed it up, and you have to know when to slow it down. So after the podcast yesterday, I went back to bed for a while. After yesterday's podcast, I went back to bed for a while, slowed the brain down, sort of like trying to meditate, only the only difference is I'm under the blankets, and I'm just trying to slow down the brain. Then I went for a shower when I had the brain slow it down, because it's hard to slow it down now at the best of times. And I went for a shower, and I said, he's Jewish. Dr. Stalford is Jewish. He's Jewish. And then the whole fucking thing clicked into place. He's Jewish. And here we have God and Satan. We have a dialectic. Dr. Stalford is Jewish, and then we can say, are the Jews God's people? Yes, that's undisputable as well. And I could break that down for you, but yes, they are. As I know I put the thing yesterday. I did share the thing yesterday, more or less saying it was a toxic racial supremacist ideology, but we could take that perspective. Yeah, we absolutely could take that perspective and make a very good argument for that. But everything with reason, and if you try to understand the reason and you understand dialectics, then you understand why. But the thing is, then when everything clicked into place, and then it clicked into place like about how much actual self-control we have, and for example, Dr. Stalford yesterday was a remake of the podcast on humanities, but it was a remake because I even made a video in this regard, and I put Dr. Stalford said that the best way to treat trauma is to triple it, and I said to myself, oh, that's fucking excellent. The best way to treat trauma is to triple it, because this is conducive to the evolutionary process. It's this what separates the wheat from the chaff. This is what you know, when you adapt and overcome, this is what makes the Jews the most intelligent race. And then it's a question of how to use that intelligence. And then it's a question, I said to myself, well, how are they using that intelligence? And then in my podcast yesterday, I said, they're behind Big Pharma, they're behind the fucking universities, they're creating, there's me watching the Christians and saying about the Christians being the biggest predator in the last 2 millennia, and the fact is they're not the biggest predator in the last 2 millennia, the Jews are. But then again, it's very hard, I'd have to think a lot, but it's very 50-50, isn't it? Who the biggest predator is over the last 2 millennia. Is it the Christians or is it the Jews? Possibly the Christians, but then again the Jews are in a close second place, because they're the biggest predator. Because I watched this film the other night about this fellow dancing young Korean man who was manufacturing crank at night and selling it to Japan. This crank, you know, and I said to myself, and then I was watching all the junkies on the crank and how it completely nearly destroyed civilization, destroyed society, because everybody was on the crank, chasing a feeling. And I said to myself, Jesus Christ. And this was challenging my morality in relation to drugs. And I said to myself, Jesus, but yeah, I said, these people have to unless you're subjected to this, you can't adapt and overcome. Do you understand? And the answer is not to like last night I was in the bed questioning the whole thing on Big Pharma, which is the same thing. All the drugs. But at the same time, the Jews, pull down this blindfold of don't even look at us, don't even stare our way, don't even question us, because we'll bring up the Holocaust and we'll bring up Hitler, and we will pull out the racist card and we will trample you, because we own the media, we own everything. Don't even look our direction, don't even look our direction, or we'll destroy you. And this is why when I looked at Dr. Stalford, the whole thing, the place, he destroyed Nietzsche on his lecture on the gay science. He had a good pop at Heidegger. That's because Heidegger was pro-Nazi. But as I said, you're not seeking to understand Heidegger, you're not seeking to understand nature. Do you understand? But the big thing is, I may go,